Welcome to the Not Old Better Show. I'm Paul Vogelsang, your host. As part of our Smithsonian Associates Art of Living series, our guest today on the Not Old Better Show is Jodi Picoult. Jodi Picoult is the best-selling author of 26 novels, 40 million of which are in print today, and is one of the most popular fiction writers around. But that doesn't mean that her books aren't tough reads facing tough issues. Picoult has addressed some very tough topics in her novels, including the death penalty, stem cell research, and child abuse, among others. Jodi Picoult prepares for each book with extensive research, sometimes investigating medical, scientific, and ethical issues. Her newest novel, Small Great Things, follows an African-American nurse who clashes with the white supremacist parents of a critically ill newborn. A confrontation that moves from the delivery room into the courtroom. Join me today in welcoming author Jodi Picoult, and join the Smithsonian Associates for the lecture series featuring Jodi Picoult at the Baird Auditorium on October 26, 2016. Get your tickets now. We will have links to the Smithsonian Associates page where you can purchase those tickets. But again, get those tickets now. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation with Jodi Picoult. Well, we are here on Skype with Jodi Picoult, author, lecturer, and someone whose books I've enjoyed for a long time, and also someone whose books my whole family has enjoyed for a long time. And Jodi, there just aren't a bunch of authors that I can say that about. So I think we've always in our family loved your books because we love the issues that you've espoused. Your writing is so important, but there's really so much more to what you do, and we'll talk about all of that today. But first and foremost, Jodi will be here in Washington, D.C. as part of the Smithsonian Associates series of courses, lectures, and classes on many great subjects. Jodi will be at the Baird Auditorium October 26th, and tickets, which will include Jodi's new book, Small Great Things, which we'll talk about, will be available too, and we'll have links to the ticket site. But Jodi Picoult, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you. Listen, just to jump right in, the title of your program at the Smithsonian, again, that's October 26th, is Jodi Picoult on Tackling Tough Topics. And I have to say, Jodi, I think that just says it all, with an estimate. You've got 40 million books in print worldwide. You're as successful and popular as ever. But what do you think it is about your writing that's both so issue-driven and so widely popular?
Well, I get accused of being psychic a lot because I tend to write about things that pop up in a national dialogue just as the book is being published. And of course, books take several years to write. So obviously I've been thinking about them for a while. I have to say, I'm not psychic.
Well, yeah, the timing of this book is absolutely perfect. Yeah.
Well, I could argue with that. Bottom line is that I think I tend to write about the things I'm worried about. And let's face it, I'm probably worried about the same things that most everyone else is worried about, which is why they feel so timely. In terms of Small Great Things being timely, it is about racism in America. Mm-hmm. Does it feel timely? Absolutely, yeah. Because you can't look at social media or turn on the news without another story about an unarmed African-American person being shot by the police. It feels extremely resonant. I understand that. But the real truth is these are issues that the African-American community has been dealing with for the past 200 years. The only reason it feels so incredibly timely is because of an advance in technology. We now see these aggressions unfold in real time in a way that we weren't able to see them before. We're just a much more interconnected world.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that for just a second, because I think that one of the quotes that I've read from you, which I just thought was so insightful, and frankly, it just stopped me cold, and it has to do with the idea that maybe people like me, view themselves as open-minded, not prejudiced, not biased, but maybe I don't mean to be so self-confessional, but maybe I haven't really accepted the fact that, some of the success I've enjoyed has come at the cost of what people of color haven't had in terms of that same success.
Yeah. That really, for me, was why I was able to write this book. If you don't mind, I'll give you a little history on it.
Please, yeah.
I actually started to write a book about race and racism 20 years ago. And it was because I had been very deeply moved by a story of an African-American undercover cop in New York City who was shot 4 times in the back by his white colleagues, even though he was wearing a color of the day, a little wristband that identified him as an undercover cop. And I remember starting that book and failing. I actually had to put it aside. I never finished it because I could not create authentic voices of color. I just couldn't do it. And I really asked myself, why? Is this my story to write? I am not a person of color. I never will be. And therefore, what right do I have to write that story when there are so many talented African-American writers doing a plenty good job without my input? And, as the years went by, I kept coming back to it and thinking, I write all the time in the point of view of people I'm not. I'm not a Holocaust survivor. I'm not a school shooter. I'm not a man. But I managed to do that well. So why is race different? Well, it's because racism is different. It's really hard to talk about without offending people, and so as a result, we often don't speak about it at all. Then fast forward to 2012, and again I stumble across a news story about a woman in Flint, Michigan, an African-American nurse with 20 years of experience who helped deliver a baby, and then the father of that child called her supervisor into the room and said, "I don't want her or anyone like her touching my baby." And he pulled up his sleeve to reveal a swastika tattoo. In their infinite wisdom, the hospital put a Post-it note on the baby's file saying, "No African-American personnel to touch this infant." The nurse sued. She settled out of court. I hope she got a gigantic payout. But it made me think, what if? What if she'd been the only person in the room when something happened to that baby? What if she had to decide between following orders or saving a baby's life? What if she wound up on trial as a result of it, and her public defender was a white woman who, like me, like a lot of my friends, would never consider themselves to be a racist? What if I could tell the story in the points of view of that African-American nurse, that white public defender, and the skinhead dad, as they all sort of examined their views on power and prejudice and race? And suddenly I knew I was going to be able to write this book. And the reason was twofold. I had changed the reason I was writing the book, and I had changed the audience. I was not writing to tell people of color how tough their lives are. That isn't my story to tell. But I was writing to the people who look like me. White people who think that they are good people, who think that they are open-minded and good-hearted, and are, but who can easily point to a skinhead and say that's a racist, and have a harder time pointing to themselves and saying the same thing. And the bottom line is, and this is something that I really took this journey when I was researching the book, and we can talk about that in a minute, but I really didn't understand that racism is not just about prejudice. You could take every skinhead on Earth and ship them off to Mars, and you would still have racism. That's because it's institutional, it's systemic, but it's both perpetuated and dismantled by individual acts. And, I think that it's easy for us to see the headwinds of racism, the way it's hard for people of color to achieve success because there are obstacles in their way. But it's very, very hard to see the tailwinds of racism. The way that as a white person, you were given advantages that we like to say, oh, we worked hard for that, or, oh, we had such great luck that we achieved, this pinnacle of success. But in reality, many of the opportunities we're given as white people are a direct result of the fact that a person of color was never even given that opportunity. For example, maybe you don't even know it, but the reason you have an apartment is because your landlord didn't really want to rent to somebody black. Or maybe the reason you got into a great college was because you did well on your SATs because your mom read to you every night when you were a kid, but there was a person of color whose mom was working 3 jobs just to make ends meet and didn't have that advantage. And if you begin to unravel that, all of a sudden you see that the American dream is not quite so dreamy, and that you, as a white person, have a very complicit role in racism.
Yeah, I think one of the things that all your fans just love about your writing is this kind of this research that you do. I know that that you went into great detail to understand the scientific, medical, and even the ethical, kind of pieces behind this. I know that your daughter spoke to skinheads. All of this is necessary for your writing. But I wonder, does your research even continue kind of after the fact that the book is coming out?
Oh, God, 100%. I mean, this book has really changed me. And, I can't get my head out of it. I mean, that's the best way I can describe it. I can't divorce myself from this topic or these characters. And, the research for this book was huge. I couldn't ask a reader to unpack his or her bias if I hadn't done it myself. So, I started off going to racial justice workshops where, I thought I was a pretty good person and this wasn't going to be a big deal. I left in tears every single night. I was so deeply affected by the stories that I heard from people of color, and the Black woman who told the story about how every morning she has to put on this mask so that she is the person that white people need her to be, and how exhausting that is. Or the Asian American woman who burst into tears when she was talking about her love-hate relationship with eyeliner because of the internalized depression she had about her own features. It was really, really upsetting. And I left there every night feeling awful about myself. And that really spurred me on like this self-discovery journey. What was my past like? Was it more racist than I ever thought? The incidents that I glossed over as a child, were they actually things that I should have stopped and paused and reflected on? And how can I change my behavior going forward? I met with multiple women of color for hundreds of interview hours. They were gracious enough to overlook my ignorance, and they basically shared their lives with me, their stories, their successes, their failures, their fears. I mean, there's the young mom who's got a brand new, adorable baby boy and who's in tears after that morning's police shooting of an unarmed African-American man, saying, how am I going to keep this kid safe? How do I teach him to not be Black? Or the young girl who talked about having her water bottle that said Vassar on it, that she used to take with her on trains and subways and put next to her with the name facing out so that as white people walked by, they could see it and think, okay, she's safe. I mean, these are things you and I never have to think about. And that's a whole privilege in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And now, it was overwhelming to readjust my thinking. And now I can't not see race. I see it everywhere. It's all I talk about. Everyone's sick of me talking about it. But I would really love to continue talking about it because God knows we need to have this national dialogue. I'm just afraid that a lot of white people don't know how to start. It's not that they don't want to talk about race. It's that they're afraid to. Because they might say the wrong thing. They don't have the vocabulary for it. And I really hope two things. I hope this book gives a springboard and a vocabulary to begin this conversation if you haven't joined it already. And I really hope that when you finish it, you are inspired to go and read an author of color. It's great that I'm writing about racism, but you really need to hear from the voice of a writer of color who's lived it. And a lot of white people, take a look at your bookshelves. Say, how often are you reading an author of color? Is it every other book for a white author? And if not, why not? A great way to open your mind is to introduce yourself to voices that are different from your own.
Yes, I think that's an important point to make in all of this. I'm personally very excited to see you on October 26th at the Smithsonian event. I think these are such important subjects to talk about during this time. I think we all, regardless of race, have a heavy heart when it comes to this subject. And right. Colin Kaepernick's work with the NFL and all of these, various shootings, the church shootings, all of this just weighs heavy. And so I think it's hard to discuss. I really get the impression, and, just from very much a familial standpoint, I mean, as a family, books like Sing You Home have really touched, an important nerve and an important subject to kind of deal with, especially in my own family personally. But I think that this is the kind of thing that you kind of have to strip away a little bit of who you think you are and see who you really are and gain this sense of empathy that maybe doesn't come until you're confronted with it.
Right. And, it is that confrontation. I mean, a really interesting thing to do is to put yourself in the position of a person of color. Think for a second what happens when you see white people not talking about Black Lives Matter and not talking about racism. It's very easy to make the assumption they don't even care. And that's usually not the case. Like you said, we do have heavy hearts and it does weigh on us, but we don't really know how to engage or what to say. And, it's interesting. The role of the white ally is not to tell people of color how to solve a problem. I mean, there are terrific leaders of color in their communities. They don't need us. It's really to use our privilege to advantage so that we can assist those voices in being heard. And there's this great little mnemonic that I stole from a terrific Black activist named Kayla Reed on Twitter. Ally. A, always center the impacted. So always make sure it is about the people who are being oppressed, right?
Mhm.
L, listen. Listen to the people who are living in the oppression. L, leverage your privilege. And D, yield the floor. One of the cool things about being white is you always have a seat at the table. Someone always cares about your opinion, which is why it's really easy for me to write this book and know people are going to read it. But what I should be doing is talking to the people who look like me, making sure they're all talking about race and racism. And then when everyone's listening, I get to step back and say, hey, here's a terrific person of color who has written something really important that you need to read. I mean, I need to give up my space at the microphone so that someone you haven't heard yet gets to speak to you. And, if you think about that, if you really want to be an ally, and if you keep those little 4 principles with you, then you'll be doing good in the world.
Yeah, I think we all struggle with how to kind of talk about this and maybe even feel defensive at times. You look at Twitter and you see all of the subject of all lives matter, versus, Black lives matter. And really those are kind of nuances to this conversation. And I really get the sense from you and from your work, all of your wonderful writing, prior to this, that you're not really telling us what to do as much as you're telling us kind of explaining what not to do in some of these instances.
Absolutely. There are definitely things you should not do if you are starting this journey of your role in racism, as a white person. And believe me, these are not things I'm telling you as a social justice educator, because that's not who I am.
Right.
There are, again, people who are so much more qualified than I am. I'm telling you as someone who's been through it and has learned this herself. And, here's what I learned not to do, and here's what you can do. There definitely are things that you should not do, starting with something that is a very common mistake. Don't say you're colorblind. How many people do you know who say that?
Mm-hmm.
And think that's the right thing to say? Well, when you say you're colorblind, it really means that you are ignoring the impact that racism has had on other people. And that's a horrible thing. You surely don't mean that, or don't say, oh, but I'm a minority too. I'm a woman. I'm gay. I'm Jewish. Again, that undermines the narratives of people of color who, are right in the center of this struggle. Mm-hmm. Don't say, I have Black friends. That's basically assuming that one person can represent a whole culture, and you wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want that done of you as well. Mm-hmm. Don't assume you have to be present at every discussion about race. I think white people, like I said, are used to always being at that table, that metaphorical table. But there are leaders in Black communities that don't need you at all. And that's okay. It's not all about you at this moment. And along those lines, don't be a savior. You're not coming in to fix anything. You're not coming in to show people how to do a better job. That's not your role. Your role, again, is just to help hold that door open so that other white people can hear their voices. And this is a really big one. Don't say all lives matter. Mm-hmm. That right now, that's a really big thing. And, hey, look, everyone knows all lives matter, but that's kind of like going to the doctor with a broken arm and saying, could you put a cast on my elbow? And he looks at you and goes, well, all bones matter. You're going to go, well, yeah, but right now, could you put a cast on this one? It's broken. And, we can't have all lives matter as long as Black lives don't. And right now, Black lives don't matter as much as white lives. And that's why it's important to say that instead.
Yeah, I think your writing, which is always so amazing, your characters are always so brilliantly put together, that you really make us see this from a different point of view. And I think that's kind of the brilliance that you're bringing to this, that this subject is a work of fiction, but so well researched that we're going to learn something about this subject.
You're going to learn something about yourself, too. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have to say the feedback that I've received so far has been so deeply moving on so many levels, from the African-American man who came up to me at a conference where I was talking about this. And he was a bookseller of color. He was the only bookseller of color in a room of 200. And he came up to me after and he said, I really need to talk to you. And he burst into tears. And he was very embarrassed and said, I'm so sorry. I just never thought I would hear anything like that here. I mean, that was that rocked me to the core.
Yeah.
To the white people who've read this, who write me a month, 2 months after they finish the book to tell me about something that they saw, a microaggression they noticed, something they noticed themselves doing that they stopped in their tracks to correct their own behavior, to question their own behavior. That is such a humbling gift as an author, to know that you could somehow change someone's perspective. None of us, no one person is going to fix racism. That's not going to happen. But if enough of us begin to see that it's a topic that doesn't lie only in the domain of people of color, that it's something white people should and need to talk about as well, that's how you begin to bridge a gap and to really heal, I think.
Well, the book is Small Great Things, and it is out October 11th. Jodi Picoult is with us, of course, today. Jodi will be at the Smithsonian Associates event on October 26th. I think fans and all of us are just so looking forward to this. To my listeners, get your tickets now. And I think that this is going to be really well worth the wait, Jodi. And I want to touch a little bit about the fans, because I think, as difficult a subject as this is, I think your fans largely trust you to take them, into places that they're not used to. And
it's true. I'm so lucky. I really am the luckiest author in the world, because I have a rabid fan base. I mean, they are the most amazing fans. They are smart. They are engaged. They are hungry for wherever I want to take them. And a lot of authors don't have that freedom. The fact that I know I can write about absolutely anything and they'll come along for the ride is really a gift.
Yeah, I think that's really wonderful too. I think it gives you some freedom. There's of course a big responsibility that comes with that, and I think that you don't take those fans for granted. I think there's there's an intelligence and an intellect here that I think is important and that fans get. I think in an age of social media, how has your own fan communication kind of changed? And, what are you doing now over your career that you weren't doing, initially? And
it's become a lot harder.
Yeah.
No, it's better. It's a closer world. It allows you to keep in touch with fans, but it also requires a significant amount of energy and time. I have always answered. I don't have an assistant, first of all. I have always answered every email that I receive from a fan. I get about 200 a day. I think it's really, really important, because if someone picked your book up off the shelf instead of someone else's, it is your responsibility to say thank you so much. And, if you've gotten an email back from me, it's really me. It's not some form. It's not, it's not some little underling writing for me. It is me. Then I do have an army of people who help me with social media, so that although I am constantly tweeting, been very political lately, but, I get on Twitter, I get on Facebook and Instagram. I also have an army of people through my publisher who help keep that alive and active, and post about events and repost pictures, personal pictures that I've thrown up on Instagram or whatever, so that there's consistency across all platforms of social media. And that's really helpful. It's really nice to have someone who's got your back, so that when I'm in an airport and I have no service, I can just quickly send a text to someone and say, hey, can you get this up on this platform? That's great. It's a double-edged sword. It's great to be able to connect with all these fans. And it is a big chunk of your day, making sure that you're keeping everybody happy and engaged.
Right. So just a little off topic, but still, kind of focused on your wonderful character development. I've read that you really loved the TV show Lost.
Yeah, I did. That was a great show.
And so now that it's off the air, what does a storyteller like you find on TV that captures your attention and surprises you?
Oh my God, I watch TV all the time, first of all. I mean, I love TV because good storytelling is good storytelling, no matter what. The show that blew me away this season so far is This Is Us. Have you watched that?
I have. Well, I saw it on iTunes the other day, and I know it's on NBC. I have not seen it yet, but I put it into
I haven't watched the second episode. Don't ruin it for me. Yeah, the pilot blew me away. Great writing, great twist at the end. And that's kind of what I look for. I look for something that surprises me or really engages me in some way. So that is my favorite show right now of the season. There's another show that I started watching last year on Hulu, The Path, which is, again, great storytelling. It's about a cult. Great character development. Then, of course, I am slave to Shonda Rhimes, that woman. Boy, her Thursday nights rock my world. Again, it's all about character and it's all about storytelling. And yeah, if I'm writing all day, I need to turn my brain off. And so when I go and watch TV at night, it is a way for someone else to be telling the stories to me.
Certainly for my age community, and listeners, the 55 plus group, we think this is going to be an exciting time. This Small Great Things is just going to be very much your style. As powerful as it is, we're going to just love it. Maybe a multi-generational issue will be kind of next on your radar. But what do you have coming up kind of following this book?
What I have coming up is a 3-month book tour. So right now my head is very much in, what do I put in my suitcase? And then when I get back home, I will start on my next book.
Oh, great. Well, again, the release date is October 11th, well worth the wait. And you can see and hear Jodi on October 26th at the Smithsonian Associates Lecture Series. Get your tickets now. Jodi, thanks so much for all your great work and your time today on the show. We very much appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jodi. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks to all my guests today, all the help on the podcast, and especially to Media, Studio Edit, and the great work by Wayne Brown and his team for editing the podcast and making me sound so much better. That is to say, not old, but better. Thanks to all.